listeners. Thank you so much for tuning in to episode 1 and 2 of my audio podcast series In Conversation with. My name is Naval Singh. I work as a developer representative at IBM Bangalore. The postings, the thoughts, the opinions, views, and comments on this podcast are my own, and they don't necessarily represent IBM's positions, strategies, or opinions. I hold an MBA from IIM Indore and BTech in Electrical Engineering from NIT Roorkela. About In Conversation with podcast series has aired its first episode on 4th February 2018 and is completely not for profit. I create and host this podcast in my personal time and do not associate it with my regular work at IBM. The only takeaway for speakers is airtime to pitch their ideas. They take around 2 to 3 minutes in the podcast to speak what they are doing, what they are working on. In a couple of episodes, Mahesh will join us in adding the developer's viewpoint. He has worked nearly 2 decades in software development and maintenance and leadership positions, and he has rich experience. You can hear more about this podcast on www.soundcloud.com/inconversationwith. Thank you so much for tuning in and enjoy the podcast. This is Naval's In Conversation with again with third episode of my audio podcast series. And today we have with us Pallav. Pallav is the co-founder of Fusion Charts, a JavaScript charting library which he started in 2002, and he has bootstrapped since then. He can be reached on Pallav. Good morning, Pallav. How are you doing?
Good morning, Naval. I'm doing great, and thank you for having me here.
It's a pleasure, Pallav. And today's topic is API economy in India. Stickiness is the word. We have seen that as software platforms or products have grown, they have moved quickly from selling licenses to subscription and finally to an API. And it's a very good and great maturity curve that companies have evolved and seen happening. So I was curious to know how Indian companies would start on this path, and who could be the better person than you, because you have a company which has grown fantastically and has had an API and product both model. So why don't you introduce yourself and let us know what are you working on, and then we'll start the discussion.
Sure, Naval. So, Naval, we are basically a JavaScript charting library, which helps web and mobile developers build charts and graphs in their applications. Typically, these charts are used for internal dashboards, their monitoring systems, surveys, so on and so forth. They have data in their system. They need to visualize it. They use our API to visualize it, as simple as that. And we've been doing it for the last 15 years. I started it out of my bedroom, and one thing led to another. And then we are about a team of 100 people across Calcutta and Bangalore, with about 6 products already live in the JavaScript charting and a couple more up in the pipeline. What's exciting for us is the information deluge which is happening in the world, and how people need to make a sense out of that data. And then the percolation of so many devices which are now coming out, which will enable better consumption of data. So just the opportunities to help people make sense out of data and not let them be scared of this data is something which is keeping us very excited. And that's what we have been working on for the last couple of years. And you'll see a bunch of new things coming out very soon.
That's great. And so let me understand this here. So as we saw the software mature, both from perspective in Indian market as well as the global market, we saw that software used to come in the form of CDs and DVDs, and then people used to buy it and install it on a computer. And we remember the days when there used to be a screen set saying that insert disk 1 of 10 and insert disk 2 of 10 in those days. So how has that come along? I know nowadays we are more talking about buying software directly from web, or not even downloading anything, just using in API. So can you walk us through this entire growth and maturity of software and how software sales have changed over the past decade or two?
Indeed. I mean, I'll have to go into a bit of nostalgia here, especially when you mentioned the floppy disk days. The fear which you would always have is, hey, what if one of the floppy drives would not work? Then you again have to call the support and get another of those floppy drives shipped. But yeah, those were fun days. So I think overall there have been multiple vectors of evolution of software level. One is the way software was delivered, which means from floppy drives to CD drives later to DVDs, then to downloadable software, then to now no software at all, basically software which is served in your browser as SaaS. Then in terms of the entire topology of how software was delivered, so earlier you had mainframes and microcomputers, which was a very heavy server-based application. Then we moved to client-server applications on Windows. Then we moved to web applications, which is primarily very thin client and a lot of code on the server. And then with mobile apps, again, we are back to client-server applications. So it's an interesting cycle which keeps on repeating there. Third, also in terms of the overall ownership of the software stack by a company. Like if you look at in the initial days, a single company would own the entire stack. Like IBM would own the hardware, the software, and they will deliver the entire suite of applications. But later, at a different point in time, you have different players owning different horizontal layers. For example, you would have word processor companies like WordPerfect or Lotus or Microsoft coming in with their Microsoft Office, and then other companies would own different parts of the application. So overall, these have been the different kind of evolution in the mode of delivery of the software, the client-server topology, the vertical and the horizontal stack, and also the consumption pattern. But as of now, more and more software is getting to a point where it's almost frictionless. People don't have to install something unless it's an app where you have to go and download. The design of the software is very good. It's not clunky. It's not like the typical old 90s enterprisey. And see, almost everybody can use software because it's so visual today.
So I hear you talk about consumption and delivery model. So can you walk us through how the license-based model changed into a subscription-based model, and now we are looking more into an API-based billing model? And what brought this entire change in software delivery and consumption?
Sure. So I think there are a couple of vectors which led to that. So first is in the license-based delivery. When people are selling software through floppy disks or like the CD drive, you send out those CD drives or floppy disks with license keys printed on the back. You would never know how many of those software licenses are being used in the company or they are present as shelfware. And by shelfware, I'm referring to software which was bought but never used. So the software vendors would not know whether the consumers are using the software, or in some cases even overusing the software, which is software piracy, which would lead to loss of revenue. And then updates were very difficult. And software is a constantly evolving field. So imagine you have shipped a bunch of CD drives for version 1 of the software. When you have to do a version 1.1, those updates need to be shipped again. But with the advent of internet, some of these things became downloadable, but still those were large file sizes, and you would not be able to track which customer is on what version of software or how to enforce all those updates for the customer, which is where with the advent of SaaS applications or web-based applications, the entire software now moved to the server of the software vendor, which is what we call SaaS. And then you have continual updates. You had multiple versions potentially of the same software running for different clients, if at all you are a large company. And the entire infrastructure and the software was controlled by the vendor. And I think Salesforce was the key enabler in this, where they started with the no cloud movement. And they said, why install software? Why have your own servers? Why have your IT team? And that's a very strong messaging which they did, which enabled a lot of other companies to look at cloud and look at software being hosted as an alternative means and a more efficient means of running the software. And once that happened, then the web protocols changed with respect to distributed computing. Like in the earlier days, it was Corba, or it was remote computing was a difficult thing to do. Or you had like things like SOAP, which was an XML-based protocol. When Web 2.0 was shaping up just a few years before that, the concept of REST-based APIs, which is basically a URL to a resource. It's basically, think of REST as like what GUI is to a business application, a REST is to a set of programmable modules. So REST enabled developers or companies, software companies, to share information between different endpoints or different software. So that sort of created the API economy. And if I'm not wrong, I think the first consumers of this API economy were, I think, eBay and Flickr, and then at later points, Salesforce and Twitter, and a whole bunch of such applications who either had content or data or images or something of that sort, where they were either doing mashup by getting other content and data from other applications, or these guys were pushing to other applications, making all the different kinds of such new products interoperable. So that is where the API economy started.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And when you say that the APIs came into picture, I believe it would be more useful for startups who are having expert in a niche area to expertise and make a software instead of building everything and then just buy the other part or borrow an API from someone else instead of trying to do everything.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I don't see a reason why, like, if a startup is trying to build a product or an offering, that should be in the functional area of their expertise. No startup goes out and says, hey, I'm going to write my own operating system, unless you're an operating system startup. So why then build the rest of the stack yourself? So let's say, imagine if you are an e-commerce company, you don't necessarily have to build your own payment gateway or your own shipping gateway, or let's say customer profiling APIs, which gives you more information about the customer. These are things which are already out there and they are done by companies whose sole focus is that. So if as a company you are trying to do too many things and which is not your core focus and which is not what is getting you the core revenue, A, you are diluting too much attention into things which are not the fundamental business. B, there's a chance that you may have these projects as awesome projects. C, whatever you do, it may be behind in terms of technology or in terms of the service quality compared to another company whose only job is getting this thing right, whose survival depends on getting this thing right. So for companies, especially smaller companies out mentioned, with focusing on that one small thing, that niche area where they're experts, where they can be thought leaders, where they know existing customers or have access to potential customers with whom they can talk to and understand the nuances of the problem and solve it in a cleaner way, is the best way to go about it. And if I have to pick up a global example, like it looks so simple, Stripe as an example, where they just created an API for better payments, like very clean API, very well documented, and developers loved it. And it's a multi-billion-dollar company right now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I missed out the company. Which is company you mentioned here?
Stripe.
Perfect. Stripe for the payments here. Correct. And recently, I believe Visa has also opened its developer API for people to come and use their existing data set, their ATMs, their white label ATMs in Europe and stuff. So I see companies coming in now, American Express, JP Morgan, they're also trying to be a part of these fintech groups where they can integrate their existing systems with newer technologies. So I believe if you are a startup who is focusing more on a particular technology, can be say a blockchain technology, can be a particular payment gateway, can be a service or a micro payment. If you are willing to let the stack be used by someone else, or you want to be a part of someone else's ecosystem, you need to have more hooks and interlocks. So yes, I agree definitely. But can you help us understand, if you are a startup and you are only focusing on a niche area, how do you get a network effect? And now we are moving from technology to a commercial part of the discussion. In a SaaS or an API or application programming interface kind of a business model, where you are focusing on highly on utilization and the value for end user, you want to have very high volume if you want to drive revenue. And volume would come when people will use it more, and people will use it more if it's more sticky, more easy to use, easy for developers, easy for end users. So, and I believe that would build a network effect. So can you walk us through, if you have an example of how a network effect is built and how that helps a startup or even a larger company getting into a API economy method to sell their software product, and how to get a critical mass in that network effect?
Sure. So I'll break this problem into three different parts here now. So first is getting the early adopters, because without early adopters, you cannot get to critical mass. And to be able to get to early adopters, you essentially need to have a set of initial customers or prospects whom you were talking to, based on whose inputs you made the product. So that is very founder driven. That's based on the network of the founder or the reach or the distribution you can reach out at a personal level, because till the software has been validated, till the the customers say that it's solving a real pain point, there's no point thinking about critical mass. Now, assuming that initial validation has been done and the product market fit has been established from a solutions perspective, then to attain critical mass in SaaS or in a B2B API world, there are two sub factors. One is what you can do with the product itself, and secondly, what do you do as a company? Now, if we think of from a product angle, inherently B2B products are not viral unless it's either a collaboration product, for example, like Slack, where you need to add more people, or InVision, where you need to add reviewers from your design to development team, so on and so forth. So one is you have to look at small hooks in the product, which allow either expansion of more members who are using the product, or wherever your product is used, other people who are seeing this product can get a sense of how this company is powering this technology. So, for example, in Fusion Charts, when we ship out the trial version of the product, which allows unlimited usage, all we write down at the bottom of the chart is powered by Fusion Charts. So, let's say if you are using Fusion Charts in your application, the trial version, and you put out with that trial mark, your customers will get to know about Fusion Charts. So essentially, then you become the conduit for us to reach out to more prospects. Similarly, Algolia, which is search as an API company, does that. If you use the free plan, you can embed custom search in your web or in your application, and in that search interface, you'll have powered by Algolia. So a lot of these widget companies or front-end component companies use this as a model. In collaboration, for example, like Slack, the moment you add another member, that member automatically has the ability to add more members. So you automatically create a tree which can grow. So either you use a product hook like messaging to tell more for the potential customers, or you have native collaboration features built into the product. So that's on the product side. There's a third one on the product side, but which is again dependent on the product, is integration. So if you look at Zapier as an example, they have integrations with all the cloud companies in the world, or most of the cloud companies. All of these are very strong words. Sure. And what they do is, so if you want to say, hey, I want to integrate my Freshdesk and Salesforce, the moment you go and type Freshdesk Salesforce integration, instead of either a Freshdesk or Salesforce page, you have a Zapier page which lists how you can use Zapier to integrate Salesforce and Freshdesk. So that also brings in network effects by using some other product names in the bigger category. At a company level, I think the main network effects would be, hey, how do you get happier customers, so that your word of mouth, whether it's internal, which means other departments or other teams, or external, which means people referring to their friends in other companies. But beyond that, I don't think there's virality like consumer market, which can be replicated in B2B product as of now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so this is part from where you can get number of users into system. But I believe we have seen in India, there are a lot of good companies in food delivery business, if I remember well, in Bangalore, which did great job, scaled up very quickly, but just didn't have a lasting business model. Or if I can quote Warren Buffett, they did not have a moat around their business plan so that they can sustain themselves and have a sustainable business model where someone else will not come and copy them. So do you have an example of company which has been able to avoid that trap and has been able to make revenue, or maybe if you can share your own examples from Fusion Charts, which has been able to make at least sustainable revenue over years by just billing API calls instead of just selling licenses?
Sure. So before I answer that level, I think the key thing to build around moat is not just price discounting. So either you have to have technology which is stronger, or you have to have a brand whose recollection is better, or extremely good customer service for which people want to pay. If it's just price discounting, I don't think that's a strong moat around it.
I agree, definitely. It's a complete business model, I believe, both technologically supreme product and which has more customer attraction and buy-in and lock-up, if I can use the word. Can be example of an iPhone which gives around 60% or more revenue to Apple and has a very devoted followership, and Samsung is still trying to get into that area and trying to get more people to use their own latest flagship products. So I agree that just price discounting is not necessary, but an example which without even price discounting, a company which has been able to sell API based product and get traction and people and still scale up and make money in India from Indian perspective.
So if I have to pick one company which is doing that, I would pick BrowserStack. So BrowserStack essentially is a Indian company which helps you test your web and mobile applications in different browsers on different devices without you having to own one. So they have an API service where you just call that API and you're able to see that screen, how this will look on, let's say, an i6 or i7 or i8 or on some obscure device. So which is primarily built on APIs. And I think they've built a fundamentally sound business. And just I think last month or so they raised their first round, which was a 50 million round. So solid revenue, solid team, completely API based company. Similarly, Postman is another one which is about developer API testing. Then you have a whole bunch of marketing tools SDK like MoEngage and CleverTap and Vita, where they provide APIs to be embedded within mobile apps for better customer segmentation, profiling, so on and so forth. Then there was another company called Byte.co, which got acquired by Full Contact, where they had a API to get more data about a person. So you send in an email in an API and you'll get about 40 to 50 dimensions, additional dimensions on that person, partly by machines and partly by computers. So that's a hybrid model, which is around providing intelligence on personal data. There's another company called Plivo, which is a cloud telephony bridge, like a bridge between internet and telephone. And that's also API-based company. At Fusion Charts, we are an API-based company where if you want to build charts and graphs in your application, you just call our API. In our case, because it's a library, so we ship it to you and you call a local API, but then you get charts and graphs. I think there are enough and more companies in India who have understood the value of API and they've started monetizing it. But the common thing between all the examples that I said is technology is the core strength for them. But you may have data as a strength. There are companies where you get access to data or you create those data sets, like in the case of Vibe.co, where data becomes your mode, whether it's the volume of data, quality of data, or the velocity of new data, so on and so forth.
Understood. And can you share an experience of Fusion Charts when your company started? And I understand it's 15 years since the company has been growing. How was the revenue growth, and were you worried when the entire delivery model changed to a more customer-driven and distributed usage instead of more people just using your own chart and developing on your own platform? And when this mobile app-based evangelists came into picture and they focused more on, say, an Android app or an iPad app, and they wanted to use JavaScript libraries for charting, did you face any kind of competition and felt that your business model may be at risk? And how was that entire that part of growth and revenue?
Sure. So I think since from the time we started from 2002 till 2013, we had a pretty good revenue growth curve. Every year we do double digits, some year we do triple digits percentage. 2013 onwards, because of a combination of open source, mobile, and a lot of tools tools which can be used for business users, where they can create these charts and graphs themselves without having the need for a developer or a library. Those have hit our revenues for sure. But that's also good in a way, because that's enabling us to think forward, where we are not just looking at ourselves as a charting company anymore, where we are looking at ourselves as an enabler for conversion of data to sense making through the eyes, through visualization. So what has happened is, rather than looking at just what these have done to us, we are now building more on top of this, saying, hey, these are the 20 other problems which developers are facing or business users are facing, or these are things which have been explored in the academic world, but they have not been brought to actual implementation in the industry. So overall, we are investing in all of them. And I think the API economy is going to further help us, because with some of the newer products that we are building, it's either going to be based on the usage, which is could be for based on the volume of data or based on the outcome that you receive from our chart, which could be either a per chart or a per video, and some of those options that we are internally exploring as of now.
Okay. So, this sounds a good roller coaster ride. So, but so how do our developers who are interested to know more about our listener developers who are more interested to know about Fusion Charts reach out to you or your team? So, where can they find you online?
Sure. So first is they can look at the website www.fusioncharts.com, or they can write to me directly. I'm at Pallav, Pallav at fusioncharts.com. Or if you want to engage on a casual discussion, I'm on Twitter at Pallavan.
Okay. And what does Pallav do when he is not developing code for Fusion Charts? What are your hobbies? What is the technology you are working on? What are the new developments you are passionate about?
Actually, I stopped coding about 6-7 years ago. So from 2002 to 2010, a lot of the code shipped by the company was written by me. Today, I think if I write a code, my team would not even accept a check-in of that code because they've come a long way. As of now, I think my primary role is to be able to understand more customer problems, what is happening in the data to sense making space, what are the current limitations of products which are out there, what is happening with information deluge which we can solve, how do we make it more inclusive. So that's on the product side, but I have a deep interest in psychology, behavioral economics, marketing. So a lot of reading goes into that. So one of the things which I've sort of realized is that while in India we are good at building products, the way we position our products or the way we go out and market and sell it is still very left brain. Because again, the fundamental aspect is a bunch of analytical guys, logical guys, left brain guys are building the products and they are going out and pitching and selling and marketing it. So that's a strong area of interest for me on how to change that aspect or percolate some of the learnings down back to the ecosystem. And we do a lot of these experiments with Fusion Charts with positioning or branding or fun mascots and so on and so forth. Some of them have worked, a lot of them have not worked, but nonetheless, we've got to keep trying.
Understood. So if this is a favorite question, and I ask this to all the panelists here. So if a developer or a startup person reaches out to you for advice, and if you would want to give them advice in growing this API economy or how to establish their own company, what would be the advice you would give to a developer and how to make their product at number one? And number two, if there's a company and founder who comes to you and says, I am in a part of API economy, I want to be a part of multiple stacks, what would be your advice to them?
I think to someone who's starting up, and especially in this case, if it's a developer out there, before you write a line of code, go and talk to 50 potential customers. It's very easy to sit and write code and then figure out, hey, nobody's buying it, and then blame the market for it. But going and talking to real prospects and customers and understanding the problem is where the real value lies before you actually go and write code. So there's a joke which we say that everything which you do before writing the first line of code is objective, and everything which you do after the first line of code is emotional, because then you're attached to the code and changing that becomes tricky for the developer. In terms of somebody who's already in the API economy, it could again be split into multiple bifurcations out there. Somebody who's already growing very fast and looking at adjacent areas in the market to play, or somebody who's looking to grow for the same API in different territorial regions, which means outside India, or somebody who's not growing and trying to figure out what's not working, whether it's an engineering problem, a product problem, or a market problem, so on and so forth. So based on the kind of problems that they have, this will be very different advice. So if it's about adjacent markets, or you ask the developer or the founder to go and talk to the customer, the same customer, and ask more problems that the customer is facing, which he could solve. Because there's nothing better than solving more problems for an existing customer, because the cost of customer acquisition is near zero, and the customer is already happy with your existing product. Mm-hmm. Somebody who's looking to grow out in global markets, couple of things. One is the quality of the product. Is it good enough? Whether it's your SLAs, your latency, your response time, so on and so forth, like whatever the technical parameters are. B, is the API scalable to a global model? Like if it's a tech company, for example, browser stack, yes, your API works everywhere because the tech is the same everywhere. But if it's a data company, let's say if you have data in India, uh, what does global expansion for you mean? Will this data be relevant for customers outside India? If yes, how many such customers are present? So on and so forth. If it's a person who's struggling with getting his API business up and running, I'd ask him to go back to step one and talk to potential 50 prospects and really see if the pain point exists and is he solving it the right way.
Mm-hmm. So you believe that it's more important for developers or startup founders to focus on client first and customer expectations first, rather than developing a product which is best and then thinking that it will sell on its own, right?
Absolutely. Unless you are the first consumer of your own product. Like for Fusion Charts, I was building charts for myself and my dad's company. So in which case, because the first consumer was me myself, so I was dog fooding my own thing. So if you're building something to solve your own niche, that definitely works. But if you're not a domain expert and you're hypothesizing that, hey, if I build this will solve some other guy's problem, before building, go and talk to the other guy.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. In a nutshell, I believe as we try to wrap up this discussion, we believe that as the entire software creation, delivery, and final consumption has matured over past 2 decades at least of our observation, it's become more away from creation to more consumption. It has moved more from away from developer who is developing a beautiful piece of code and expecting it to fly, to a more client-centric and customer-centric development, more agile way of doing iterations and short sprints and adding features and uh, coming back and forth to match the requirements. Both the earlier model of selling hundreds of licenses and those licenses remaining unutilized and someone realizing it 4 years down the line when there is inventory done, it's moved more towards an effective and cost efficient manner of software utilization when it's more of a subscription and monthly consumption. And then it has become more from an instantaneous consumption, kind of an API based, call based billing system where people are able to get more value. And it has also helped the developers because now they know better where their product is being used and how that is being used. And so they can tweak their product to create more value. I think the pricing would also change in the sense it was earlier cost-based pricing. It's now more value-based pricing, and what features customer wants. It's more easy to personalize and curate a software product or an API to suit a requirement. More essential for that API or product to have hooks, integrations with stacks across different proprietary and open source frameworks for scaling up equally, has to be more developer friendly in terms of ease of use, because developers are now spoiled for choices. There are a lot of companies coming up with equally friendlier interfaces and just simply click and drag and graphical user interface, GUI based systems, moving a bit away from command line interfaces. But still, I believe that's the entire journey that our software sales model has seen and will continue to see as we move on. From both the revenue model, we'll see that consumption will have to pick up for companies to be profitable. And definitely, I heard that Amazon is hiring economists from Harvard and MIT, and they're trying to get the best pricing model, so to reduce any customer surplus and to increase their own customer price discrimination, so that they're able to build the each best price each person has the ability to offer. And that's the way I see this entire API economy moving ahead, where entry barriers are pretty low. A low price API has people who want to use it can immediately put their card up and use a couple of paisa per API call to use it. But again, for them to make a lasting revenue, it has to have both network effect and large customer devoted user base. Thank you so much, Pallav. Any parting comments before we wrap up the show?
I think one thing which I missed out is for developers, if you're building an API business, just ensure you have great documentation. There have been a lot of API products and API libraries which work because they had fantastic documentation, quick start tutorials. So don't undermine that part. I think I'll leave it to that. Great to hear, Naval.
Yeah, I definitely. Documentation is the part where developers will and creators will have to look into. Second is definitely discussion forums. There have to be active discussion forums where people can come and post their questions or code challenges or problems and bugs, and they have to be very quickly answered to so that the developers do not face any problems in using the product. So yes, both an active online community in terms of documentation and support would be the way ahead for companies to create a smoother experience for their APIs to fly. Thank you so much, Pallav, for joining me on this Sunday morning. This show, if you are listening, dear listeners, it will go live on 11th of March. And it was great talking to you, Pallav. And this was the third episode of In Conversation With. Next episode, we will get another new Indian leader or a technology expert to speak about a topic. The topic can be rural innovation. The topic can be education and digital content delivery. If you have any suggestions, do let us know on our Twitter handle, which is In Conversation With. You can let us know on our SoundCloud channel, which is again soundcloud.com/In Conversation With, and also on our LinkedIn portal. Thank you so much for your time, Pallav. Have a good day. And thank you, dear listeners, for tuning in.
Thanks, Naval. Have a good day ahead. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.